during the recession a few years ago, we were not building to the demand in the state. A lot of construction stalled, just like it did with new home construction, but we are growing again, and I think things are looking very positive for us. It's an election year in 2018. You've got about half of the legislative body is up for re-election. Some folks are being termed out, so we'll have some open seats, but folks like to go back to their constituents as lawmakers, and they want to come back with that sort of political pork of, this is what I've done for you. These are the great things. I brought you this funding, or reduced your taxes. They don't really like to focus on things that can be very divisive during an election year.
This is Eric Odom of the Invest Florida Real Estate Show. For all of you Tampa folks, I just wanted to talk briefly about Suites at Madison. Suites at Madison is a place to conduct business, whether it is for an hour or a month. This is the place to get your work done. This is where we hold all of our networking meetings. This is where we host our podcast, but we're not the only ones who use the office. Title companies use the conference for closings. Real estate companies host their sales meetings here. Attorneys use the space for depositions. There was even a Canadian company recently who used one of the offices for a couple of months while they were setting up their permanent office in the Tampa area. So if you need a quiet place to get away for a few hours or weeks or months, or to meet a client privately, check out www.downtowntampaoffice.com to see what the deal is. Oh, and you can also sign up for our regular networking events there, so go check it out. Now, let's go on to the show.
You are listening to the Invest Florida Real Estate Show, covering topics in lending, buy and sell strategies, property management, hot markets, and tips and tools to guide you along the way on your path to real estate success. You want Florida investment real estate talk? You have come to the right place. And now, our hosts, Eric Odom and Stephen Silverman.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Invest Florida Real Estate Show. This is your co-host, Eric Odom, with Stephen Silverman. Stephen, everybody trying to get deals done by the end of the year.
Eric, they are, and real estate's always changing. Retail's changing. We're watching certain parts of retail just in trouble, and yet it was interesting to me as we're working with certain clients how prices are climbing in certain corridors. I was watching, in St. Petersburg, it used to be $40 a square foot was the maximum. Florida, now we're watching retail go to $60 a square foot, and that seemed a lot until I decided to look at what other retail hubs in the country were paying, and it's really very interesting. In Palm Beach, for instance, they're up to $145 a square foot. On Lincoln Road in Miami, they're paying $300 a square foot. That's pretty incredible. And
yeah, the fashion district, I know in Miami's, we've seen some pretty high price sales run through there too. So I can't imagine that the lease rates are too far behind.
So I guess wherever it's people and population, and you have to have something to sell. Chicago, just for fun, was North Michigan Avenue, $550 a square foot. Union Square, San Francisco, $700 a square foot. Those are incredible rates. Rodeo Drive, $875. But the most incredible was in New York on Upper Fifth Avenue, where there was some retail leases at $3,000 a square foot. So we've got nothing to complain about.
Yeah, it's interesting. Retail's going through a lot of transition with the internet, and it's affecting the vacancies, the occupancies in these centers. But good retail is always going to be good retail. Retail is still a social endeavor, and you're still going to see areas that have high foot traffic attract high-priced rents, right? I mean, there's still people are buying Rolexes. Don't buy that on the internet. Primarily, they're wanting to go in and touch and feel it and be made to feel special. And those types of spaces, along with all the service and restaurants, those places still you can't order that haircut by Amazon, at least not yet. So, we're not going to see a complete collapse. And of course, those numbers show that, Stephen, that retail's still humming along.
That's an interesting thought. A haircut by Amazon. A drone will come to your door and take care of it.
And, we're not going to actually talk about, and our guest today is on the multifamily side. And we love hearing from her every year. She comes in and tells us what's going on and informs those multifamily investors of how to keep themselves out of trouble for the coming year. So we're looking really forward to having a chat with her. And before we roll into our guest, I wanted to remind everybody, if you have not done so already, please go to either Stitcher or iTunes or Google Play Store and give us a review. It helps us when we get guests. The guests go to look to see if people are actually paying attention to the show. And if they are, then they decide to invest their time with us. But it definitely helps when you guys are going in and leaving us reviews. It helps us to try to acquire additional guests. Also, if you've got ideas on a show, we don't know what you don't know. And so if you're telling us that you want to hear certain guests and speakers, we'll definitely try to accommodate. Stephen, anything else before we roll into our guest?
No, let's roll. Today we have with us Courtney Barnard. Courtney is the Government Affairs Director for the Florida Apartment Association, FAA. In this role, she serves as the head policy advisor for state-level issues, and she advocates at the state and federal level via lobbying efforts regarding the multifamily industry. She is a native of California. She has a certificate of public policy from the University of Washington and a master's degree in political science from USF. Courtney, welcome to the Invest Florida show.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric and Stephen. It is a pleasure to be back on the show.
By popular demand.
2017.
Yeah.
Well, what can I say? You know, that California accent, your listeners must just want to hear it over and over again. But
that's his Southern accent.
I'm happy to come back and tell you what's going on with the apartment world. And it's been quite a year in 2017. And I think in the future, we're just looking for even more and more growth in Florida with apartments.
Yeah, this is one of the episodes every year that is one of the most anticipated. All of our listeners like to know what's coming down the pipe that might affect their investment properties and their apartments throughout the state. Courtney, why don't you tell us a little bit about where we are in the market right now?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, apartments are growing. You know, every week we have more and more folks moving to the state of Florida, and our national association actually just came out with a lot of new statistics about apartments and regarding Florida in general, and just sort of analyzing what growth we can expect. Just to give you a few numbers, it looks like by 2030, about 40% of residents in Florida will be living in apartments, and this really means a steady pattern of growth throughout this time. Over 2.4 million people already live in apartments in Florida, and the rental lifestyle is just growing and growing. To meet the demand that we have, we'll actually have to build about 600,000 new units throughout the state. As you've probably heard, occupancy is at an all-time high. So pretty much wherever you go across the state of Florida, you are hit with almost 90%, sometimes 94% occupancy in these markets. So it can be difficult at the moment to find an apartment, but we are seeing pretty steady growth. About 35% of all residential construction permits pulled in the state are to build apartments. So we've got a lot of demand, but we are increasing the supply, which is good. During the recession a few years ago, we were not building to the demand in the state. A lot of construction stalled, just like it did with new home construction, but we are growing again, and I think things are looking very positive for us. We've got a lot of folks who would be moving into the home ownership market, millennials in particular. They're finally moving out of their parents' houses and they're getting apartments. These sort of luxury apartments are definitely a big target for them, and you'll see a lot of growth in Tampa and Orlando and South Florida with these amenity-rich apartments. But it's definitely a year of growth this year, and I think, like I said, steady growth all the way through 2030 is really what we are seeing, and we need to build more to meet that demand in Florida.
So I have a question to ask you. Are we building in the right area? Like you mentioned luxury and with all the amenities, and, you know, prices are getting pretty high. What about the middle class area?
Yeah,
And I know
working class.
It's expensive to, land costs more now, building costs more. Are we able to even address that? Because that's where I see the bigger demand.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've been like in Hillsborough. I don't think we've seen a B class, working class apartment come out of the ground in years. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong, because I looked through some statistics that 19,000 new apartments were coming on from 1914 to 1918, all of them luxury. So vacancies will climb in that area, I think.
That is actually a really great point, and you are exactly right. We are building a lot of luxury apartments, and there has been very steady growth in that, but that does not mean there isn't growth in those B-class and affordable units. I read a really interesting statistic recently from the Sadowski Coalition, which is a group that basically advocates for affordable housing. And one of the things that they found was almost 1 million Floridians, just over 900,000 Floridians, spend more than 50% of their income on rent. And this isn't necessarily renting an apartment versus a home, but just in general. So you have a very large market of people who are spending more than half of their income on rent. And you're exactly right. Building apartments, building and construction in general has become very expensive. We've seen some local municipalities like the city of Maitland, which is just north of Orlando, pushing for non-wood frame construction, but to have everything built from steel. This hasn't necessarily passed yet, but that would make things even more expensive if we started to see that across the whole state.
Sure.
But there is a huge market, and unfortunately, to make a lot of projects profitable, building something that's a Class B or an affordable unit just isn't necessarily the right option for a lot of builders. So
construction costs, construction costs are high.
Yeah. We've been, I work on the advocacy side of things, the public policy side, and I've been spending a lot of my time recently speaking with local governments, speaking with our legislators in Tallahassee about the affordable housing crisis that we really have in the state of Florida. A lot of people, like I said, are spending almost half of their income on their rent, and they simply can't find places to live where the rent is affordable. But unfortunately, because of the cost of construction, unless you move into an older property, you're not going to find that lower rent. Like I said, we simply don't have enough units to meet the demand in Florida. So I definitely think that the market will dictate that more affordable units be built. If we start having large vacancies in luxury units, then people will have to build what is marketable. So I think we will see that. One of the legislative issues that we advocate for year after year is affordable housing trust funds. Florida's got a really interesting system, unlike any other state, where basically every single real estate transaction that takes place, whether you're buying a home, a commercial property, but any real estate purchase, a 1% fee is added onto that. It's called the dock stamp fee. On this 1% fee, these funds go into what's called the Sadowski Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And then those monies basically sit there for a year. And at the end of the legislative session, 30% of those funds are supposed to go back out into the market as loans to build or refurbish affordable apartment units. And then 60 or 70% of them actually are supposed to go out towards homeownership projects like Habitat for Humanity. So
is that happening, Courtney?
Well, that's just what I was going to mention. Any state trust fund can be swept and used for something else in the general revenue fund. So most likely, year after year, the funds are swept. They're to build I-4, I-75, fund schools. They're going towards different projects. Last year, we got about $120 million for affordable housing funding. And that's then split up into counties, and it's based on your population, what you're allocated. But for probably the past 2 years, we've gotten some of the funding, never full funding. But 10 years beyond that, we got nothing. So it was swept year after year after year. And those funds should have been a dedicated revenue source for affordable housing. We wouldn't have this affordable housing problem if we didn't keep sweeping the funds. And it's interesting, Governor Scott just released his budget yesterday, and out of the 300 or so million of the funds, he's actually only going to, in his budget plan, to sweep 93 million of them. So I think it's an interesting political move on his part. He's going to be running for Senate. And I think that he wants to be seen as a little bit more of a gentler candidate and not taking those funds away like he has done in the past. But we'll just kind of have to see, what the House and Senate do with their budgets. But I think, especially with our most recent hurricane season, we've got a lot of folks coming in from Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands who will be looking to come to Florida, and they will need these affordable places to live. So, and we have all sorts of people living here already who need access to these places.
Courtney, before we get too far into our talk, I wanted to mention again, if folks don't know, the Florida Apartment Association is the primary advocacy group for apartment owners in the state of Florida. And if you're not members, we always strongly recommend that you join, because it's hard to have your voice heard individually. It's much easier when you're grouping together with other like-minded people with similar interests and goals. And so we would highly encourage you to do that. In the meantime, Courtney, there's a lot of data on the Florida Apartment Association, everything from what you're working on from advocacy to data related to the market. Can you go ahead and tell people how to go there?
Of course. Our website is really simple. It is FAAHQ.org. So it's just like Florida Apartment Association headquarters.org. And like you said, we have a lot of data available about market trends. We have information on all of our advocacy efforts, ways to better position yourself in your local market, if that means, becoming a certified smoke-free community. If you wanted to send your local managers or leasing agents for more training, if you want access to all of our supplier members to the industry, we've got that as well. But it's a great way to find others in the industry, to network, to learn, to advocate. And it's all available, like I said, on FAAHQ.org. My contact information is up there as well. I'm sure you'll give it out at the end of the show, but anytime you've got a question about a local legislative issue or something happening at the state level, I monitor all of these policies, and I'm always happy to help out our members or our potential members kind of navigate the very complicated legal and political system in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Could you give us any more sort of tidbits on the 2018? You say we've got a kindler and gentler Governor Scott probably trying to run for Senate, and that is affecting how these trust funds from the Apartment Association are getting used. What else are you seeing out there in the 2018 election next year that might affect the apartment owner community?
Well, in an election year, people do like to say it's a quote unquote do no harm year. And I think we'll see a lot of that in the upcoming legislative session. It does start in January, but our lawmakers are already in Tallahassee doing our pre-committee meetings. They're hearing bills already. And right when January starts, they will be voting on them. I've definitely seen a bit of a slowdown in what bills are being filed. Generally, we have what I like to call zombie bills, and they're bills that just come back again and again and again, and things that are just really bad changes to landlord-tenant law or eviction proceedings, things that definitely won't help you if you invest in apartments, if you own or operate any type of rental unit. So I haven't seen as many of these come up yet. I mean, knock on wood, it's still early, but tomorrow is the deadline. November 17th is the deadline to file any bills. So you can still file amendments after that, but any new legislation, we should be done with that tomorrow. So fingers crossed I don't get a whole boatload of legislation that could harm apartments. But like I said, it's an election year in 2018. You've got about half of the legislative body is up for re-election. Some folks are being termed out. So we'll have some open seats, but folks like to go back to their constituents as lawmakers and they want to come back with that sort of political pork of, this is what I've done for you. These are the great things. I brought you this funding, or, reduced your taxes. They don't really like to focus on things that can be very divisive during an election year. So that can be good. At the same time, though, if you have an important issue that you need to address, lawmakers might not want to address it this year. So we've kind of strategically looked at what we should focus on and picked our legislative priorities. Our members got together and discussed this, and we wanted to focus on things that we could have accomplished this year that maybe aren't too controversial or wouldn't be turned down by lawmakers. So that's kind of how we're shaping up for the 2018 session.
Okay, so Courtney, let me ask you a question on taxes and multifamily, because apartment values are going up, and so the assessments are going up, and multifamily properties are considered non-homestead properties, and there's a cap on them. What would happen if a cap is not reauthorized? Is anything happening regarding the cap on the homestead property tax for apartments?
Yes, there is. So there's two types of properties in Florida. There's your homesteaded property, which is the house you live in full time, and then any other type of property in Florida is non-homesteaded. So each year, your assessed property value that can increase 10% each year if it's a non-homestead property. And this cap was put on actually in the pre-recession days around like 2004, 2005, because we started to notice when there was no cap on property value assessment, local municipalities increased their millage rates quite a bit, and we were starting to see these exorbitant tax bills come through. And it wasn't just apartments that affected, it was any type of commercial property, any small business, anything that wasn't a house, basically. And so we saw a lot of small businesses have to shut down. It increased the cost of rent because those costs will trickle down to your residents who live in your rental unit. And this was basically, it was passed in 2007 and basically was given a 10-year authorization, and it has a sunset date. So we'll be on our 2018 ballot. And so this means when you get that ballot in November, you definitely want to vote yes to reauthorize this 10% cap, especially if you have any type of commercial asset holdings, because you could see your tax bill just go sky high if this is not reauthorized. This was passed last year unanimously by the House and Senate in Florida, but it has to go to voters. It's a constitutional amendment to make this cap permanent, just like when we've had, all of these exciting constitutional amendments like medical marijuana or the Forever Florida funds. It's that same deal. It's got to be 65% of the electorate has to approve this. And so I think November will be an exciting time. The 10% cap, it just keeps in place what we have going so far. So it's beneficial for businesses because they know what to expect on their tax bill, and it doesn't have any cuts to, first responders, schools, or teachers. We're keeping things the way they are and not trying to lower that tax. So if you feel like, no, we need to have more tax, we need to protect these groups, you're not losing anything by voting yes on this. So
a lot of negativity with that because they're like, oh, this is businesses just trying to get a free ride again. And there's a lot of education that goes in to say, guys, you're paying for this. At the end of the day, if you're going to cripple these businesses by continuing to 10, 15% every year increase on the property taxes, they're not going to just absorb that. They're going to pass it on to you. And then it increases the cost of living for everybody here. And so there's a education process that you have to go through with the electorate to make sure that they understand those things. And it's not just these quote unquote greedy businesses out trying to take advantage of the public again. It's not that at all. These taxes roll downhill.
That's exactly right. And, our taxpayers actually in Florida are benefiting because every property is assessed each year. As you mentioned in my bio, I'm a native California, and they have a little bit of a different system there where if you buy a business or if you bought an apartment building, you would only be taxed at the assessed rate of the year that you bought it. So if your property value went up quite a bit, you as the owner would save that money, but you would constantly be paying the same assessed value year after year. So if you bought a property in 1976 for $50,000, and now it's worth $2 million, on the tax roll, you're still only paying that value of what you purchased. So we actually have a very beneficial system when it comes to those folks who benefit from the tax roll, like our first responders, schools, any local municipality, that basically they know that they will be getting an increase in the property value each year, because properties do tend to increase each year. That's why they're such a great investment.
Mm. You know, I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but you know, we are primarily between sales tax and property tax. That's how we fund our government, because we don't have primarily income tax for anybody. And so it's you know, the plus side is we don't have income tax. The downside is that
you got to get the money from somewhere.
You got to get it from somewhere. You still have to pay for the roads and the schools and the first responders and all this sort of thing. And then you're going to rely on primarily on property taxes, which are tied to property values, which are highly volatile. It creates this a system where in years that the property values are going up and up and up, the governments are flush with cash. And then you have situations when the economy goes down and the prices fall, the government can't supply primary services. So it's a very volatile, you have fixed cost of government to maintain roads and schools and whatnot. And this variable cost of raising the revenue side, it makes it really challenging. But I mean, we're not going to solve that problem today. It's something we note that lots of times when we're in these types of markets, legislators want to try to scrape as much off the table as possible when the prices are high, because they're worried about what's going to happen 3 years from now if we have a downturn in the market and the prices come back the opposite direction, and their budgets get, you know, whacked by 30% because property values have fallen by 40%, like what happened in 2008.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And I wish it was an easier issue to solve, but I do hope, you know, if this 10% cap goes through, at least there is some stability for investors and for business owners who we rely on in the state of Florida to keep bringing businesses here, that they'll know that year after year, you know, this is what I can expect on my tax bill. And I hope that, you know, that can bring some stability to our tax rolls and into the employment market in general. I think that these types of things help. You know, it makes it more secure for a person to open a business here or to buy rental and investment properties. So that would be the good side of it to look at from my end. But, you know, it's just one of several issues that, you know, we're examining for our 2018 session, and something for everyone to keep their eye on.
Yeah, and you were going to bring us three issues, the top issues that you're working on. That was one of them, was the tax issues. And Stephen already mentioned that. What's another one of the three issues that you wanted to talk to us about today, Courtney?
Well, I wanted to talk about an important housing discrimination bill, and this is one of those zombie bills I talked about that has kind of come back year after year. Now, Florida has a unique system where we work with HUD, which is the Housing and Urban Development Program, which is a federal program, where basically if someone feels they've been discriminated against in housing, and this is, you know, purchasing a home, renting an apartment, but any form of housing, they can basically take the alleged incident, report it to their local HUD office or the Council on Human Relations, and have this investigated for free. And this is anyone in the state of Florida can do this. And once this investigation by an independent party has been concluded, if they have found there is a cause for discrimination, you can then take this to civil court and sue. And it's basically, you've got a year to report the alleged incident. Everyone will have the same access to an investigation, to mediation, and then to civil court. So it's a great way to allow folks who might not have access to funds to hire an attorney, that they can just go through HUD, have this investigation and conciliation process, and it's in a specific time frame. Now, that's what the current law is in Florida. This bill that has been filed again this year seeks to basically nullify the investigation portion and would allow someone to simply skip an investigation and go directly to civil court for any alleged incident. And it would also double that time frame. I said, you're allowed to do this within 1 year. It would change that to 2 years. So this can definitely be a problem for anyone who owns rental properties or anyone who works in the housing industry, because now you could be faced with a civil judgment or civil suit against you when a claim hasn't even been investigated. And this is really, in my opinion, a way for those billboard trial attorneys to basically have an easy way to start suing landlords.
Yeah, they'll have a field day.
And it's as simple as that. It's disguised as something to help individuals who have suffered from discrimination, but it really takes the system where they had a free investigation, where everyone had equal access to justice, and now it's a you pay to play system. You pay this attorney, and they'll see how far they can get you. So
sure, and they work on contingency, so
exactly.
You'll see it escalate.
So I think we'll see if this passes, which hopefully it will not. There's only one bill in the Senate, Senate Bill 306, filed by Senator Rousseau, who is from the Tampa Bay area. But this bill was not heard in any committees last year. We fought it quite hard to keep it out of there, and we're going to do the same this year. But I would just be on the lookout, because if this does pass, you could be faced with, or anyone who owns rental properties could be faced with a civil suit for something completely unfounded and that is not investigated.
And it can come so long afterwards, so you can be blindsided.
And you could be, and then if you go to court, you'll have to hire an attorney, pay for those attorney's fees. Whereas if they went through the normal process, neither the landlord or the resident has to pay for that. So it's something that is funded through the federal government, and we think it should remain that way and have everyone get equal access to justice.
Yeah, it's nobody. It's interesting. We get to have these discussions all the time with investors about, they're upset about this issue, that issue. They're going to sue, and I'm like, man, the last thing you want to do is to go into a lawsuit, because what ends up happening is that it's a black hole. So this is, hopefully, you're right that this SB 306 gets tossed. Because nobody really wants to be involved in that type of thing.
So, Courtney, another thing that you had mentioned to us was the process of evicting people or terminating leases when tenants are on a month-to-month. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
I would be happy to. Now, this can be a little bit of a complex issue to explain, but imagine I am a resident living in an apartment building that you own. I'm on a month-to-month lease, so under normal Florida statute, I could give you 2 weeks notice and be on my way. I can move out. So let's say I get a job in New York City. Today is November 16th, so I could just say, hey, I actually would like to move out by the end of the month, and that would be it. And our contract would be done. And the same goes for the landlord. Could tell that to the resident. They could say, you know what, we're going to fill your apartment with someone new. Come December 1st, they're going to sign a 12-month lease. So since you've got 15 days before your lease, before the end of the month, we're giving you your notice. That's the way it works in everywhere except the city of Miami, because all good things come from South Florida. And this past June, the city of Miami voted to change that. So unlike working on that 2-week system, under Miami's new law, you have to give a 30-day notice, but it's within your rental period. So today, as an example, it's November 16th. If I gave you my notice to move out, it wouldn't work at the end of the month because I have to do 30 days. Basically, I wouldn't be able to move out until January 1st. So unless you give your notice on the 1st of the month, and it happens to be a 30-day month, this doesn't work in February. No one can ever move in February. That's the issue. It's basically a 45-day, almost up to a 60-day notice. And this has a lot of issues because it basically changes any lease that you would have to write for anyone who lives in the city of Miami. And if you are a landlord and you don't happen to know that this law changed, this ordinance changed, and then you have someone who tries to move out, or you give them a 15-day notice, they could take you to court for this. So there's a lot of issues that just stem from the fact that it exposes any landlord to additional liability. And let's be honest, if you are given your notice, if you own a building and you give notice to a resident and they'll have to be out and it gives them that full 45 days, I'm sure that a lot of these residents will not end up paying that last month of rent. If they know they've got to be out of the building, or in my hypothetical situation, if I get a job and I'm moving away out of state, I'm still going to leave in those 2 weeks, and I probably wouldn't want to pay you for that last 30 days of rent if I'm not going to be there. So it really just ties the hands of both residents and tenants. And the group that was basically fighting for this is a tenants' rights organization and a group called Organize Now. We've seen these groups come up mainly along the west coast of the U.S. They're very popular in like the Seattle, Portland, San Francisco area, but it's a grassroots effort where people are getting together and pushing for all sorts of different changes to eviction proceedings, to criminal background screenings. Actually, in the city of Seattle now, you cannot actually screen someone for their criminal background. So you could have someone who's committed, a terrible crime moving right next door to you, and no one on the property is going to know that, or someone who's maybe committed check fraud who would not be a good person to have in your community or around any type of financial asset can move in there. But we're just seeing a lot of these groups get together and push little by little and chip away at basically every state's Landlord-Tenant Act. And it's getting really far along on the West Coast. We're seeing a lot of new rent control. We're seeing inclusionary zoning where apartment owners have to set aside, 20% of their building as affordable units. There's just a lot of new restrictions coming up, and it's creating an environment where it's harder and harder to control who you rent to or for how long. And that can be something that's really scary for residents. If you live in an apartment and you have children, or let's say you send your daughter off to college and she gets her first apartment, you probably want to make sure that they are living in the safest environment possible. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of groups just kind of fighting to let anybody into these apartment communities. So these tenants' rights organizations and grassroots organizations, a lot of them have been motivated by this book called Evicted, which is it was written by a Harvard sociologist, Matthew Desmond. And I read his book. I find it really interesting. I would definitely recommend anyone who owns rental units to read it. It focuses quite a bit on what would be termed a slumlord, so definitely not the average member of the Florida Apartment Association or of anyone that is a reputable landlord. But unfortunately, I think that his book has really given the impression to the average American that that's what every apartment owner or apartment investor is like.
It's predatory. Basically
they
predatory.
Seem to have no cares for their residents and are just there to make money, not provide housing.
Yeah, it's interesting how sometimes, the problems that landlords have with tenants are just kind of glossed over or ignored, and some of these tenants make their life miserable.
Yeah.
It's one of these things where this Miami issue in the city of Miami, it might seem small, but when you start having every different city or county make changes and change the rules, it can become very difficult to invest in properties, especially if you do so across the state of Florida. A lot of our members have multiple communities located in many different cities across Florida. And so when you have so many changes per city or per county, it makes it difficult for someone to operate their business and make sure that they're constantly knowledgeable and following every single local ordinance. So our main goal with this Miami issue is to take it to the state legislature and ask them to preempt any local city or county from changing landlord-tenant law statutes like this.
Sure. So it's statewide. It's statewide, and everyone knows what's going on.
Exactly. We think that it should be a uniform code of law when it comes to landlord-tenant.
As you were talking, I was thinking about the statistic you quoted about 600,000 more units are going to be needed, multifamily in Florida. In the research that you see, what are they saying about the number of people now moving down to Florida or the growth?
Well, in general, and that's a number that I've pulled before from the Florida Chamber. They do a great job of tracking that. And I think that on average, it's something like over 1,000 people a week move to the state of Florida. So if that's almost 52,000 people a year. And a lot of these folks, some of them might be snowbirds who live here part-time, and they often live in apartments. And then I think it's a lot of people who are coming to Florida because we have quite a bit of job growth and just growth in general throughout our state. A lot of companies have been moving here in recent years. We're expanding and creating deep water ports across Florida, which bring in a lot of high-paying jobs. We have things like SpaceX, Jeff Bezos' company, his space company who's come to Florida. So I know that Florida has tended to be known as sort of the Mickey Mouse and retirement area, but I don't think that people quite understand what a growing economy we have. We have a huge, medical economy.
Orlando,
we
sure.
have a giant new VA center. We have a lot of really neat tech centers. There's a huge, in the Tampa area, I know you have Southern Command and a lot of military operations. We have quite a few in the Panhandle as well. I mean, I don't think that people realize how awesome Florida is. I came here from California. I love it. I never plan to leave. But we are growing quite a bit. We've got a lot of jobs coming into our state and a lot of new and unique opportunities. We've got great weather. And I think that just is what draws people here. And I think one interesting change that we might see is that we have been a bit of a transient community for many years. Folks will come down here, they'll live for a couple of years, move back out of state. Like I said, that snowbird population, they might live here half the year, but they don't vote here. They don't stay as politically involved. But I think we're seeing some changes in Florida with regard to our population, their educational attainment, how long they'll be staying here, what they're investing in. But I think this growth will be good for us, and it's going to kind of change the dynamic maybe of what people think of Florida. And like I said, that's almost 52,000 people a year if you're getting 1,000 people a week. And that's not even counting. I mentioned the hurricane season and a little bit of its impact, but in Central Florida, where our headquarters is located, they estimate we'll be receiving about 50,000 people from Puerto Rico. And I think the state in general has had about 120,000 people come up from Puerto Rico because of Hurricane Maria. So these folks will also be looking for jobs. They'll also be looking for housing. And I think it could put a strain on our local schools and economy, but you're also bringing in people who are going to want to build their lives up again, get jobs. They're going to be adding more to, you said we rely quite a bit on sales tax. Everyone who comes here is going to be buying a lot of things. If you come here with nothing, you've got to buy all of your clothes, all your food, all your furniture. So it's going to actually inject quite a bit of capital, I think, into Florida's economy.
Yeah, and plus with the growth you cited, there's the organic growth on top of that.
Yes. So that was just new people coming, but our population is growing as well. And when you have people who are less transient, we have more families just growing organically in Florida. I think that it will be good for the housing market in general, both for apartments and that single family home ownership group as well. We're going to see a lot of growth
and we're still priced. We're still priced lower, correct, than lots of places in the country.
Well, we got California.
California, like San Francisco, but it's more affordable.
I think everybody's always going to be lower priced in San Francisco.
Yeah.
But I think that's the most expensive city in America now. I think they've beat out Manhattan for property prices and rental prices. Yeah. But some great things about Florida, which is kind of interesting, that a lot of properties, especially apartment properties, most of them were built after the 1970s. And we still have a lot of areas in the state that, even if they're relatively urban, there's still a lot of open spaces where we can choose how we want to design our cities. And some of the fastest growing concepts for apartments are a lot of these like really walkable mixed use spaces where you've got, your apartment homes on the second floor and above, and on the bottom floor you might have restaurants and shops, bicycle parking. I know in Orlando we started these juice bikes, which I see everywhere, these bright orange bicycles, and you can like swipe a credit card in this bike and rent it and ride it around the city, and all sorts of restaurants have little bike parking and places where you can turn them in. And I feel like in your area and in the Tampa Bay area, I've seen sort of the same thing where these walkable new city spaces are becoming really popular, and it's apartments that are being built there.
Yep.
It's a really cool thing that we have going for us. That it's not like San Francisco or Manhattan where things were built 100 years ago or more, and we just have no space to change the dynamic of our cities. We still have so much of a way to plan out and have smart growth, which I think is really cool. And I love that the apartment industry is sort of at the forefront of this right now.
Well, Courtney, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate for 2018. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we let you go today?
Well, like I said, we've got our focus for next year. Obviously, looking for that affordable housing funds, protecting our industry partners, and hoping to get that statewide preemption. But that's sort of what our focus is on. After February, when legislative session is all done, I think I'll pour myself a really big glass of wine and then maybe come back on your show again and tell you how it all went.
Perfect. That'd be awesome. So let us know again how people can reach you, Courtney, before we let you go.
Certainly. So our website is faahq.org. And my email is really easy. I'm always happy to answer any local or state level legislative issues. It's Courtney, Courtney, and it's at faahq.org. So just like our website, but I'm always happy to answer any questions, or if you want to know about our membership benefits, I can tell you all about that too. But, until next time, gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. It's really been a pleasure.
Thanks, Courtney, and we'll share that glass of wine with you after the legislative session.
Sounds good. Maybe you can bring us some nice South African wine, Stephen.
I'll do that.
Thanks, Courtney. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And that was Courtney Barnard from the Florida Apartment Association. Always love to have Courtney on the show. She gives us the annual update of what just happened and what's going to happen in the future. If you're an apartment complex owner, you need to stay on top of these rules and regulations. You do not want to be surprised. And that's we're thankful that Courtney is able to come on and give us these updates. Stephen?
I feel like when Courtney talks to us that she takes us out of the woods and we can see some of the trees. I mean, some of the statistics she gave, like we look around outside our office and all we see are cranes and buildings going up, and yet we're still going to need 600,000 apartment units in Florida. So the growth isn't stopping. We just hope the growth takes place in the right way and that we can reach some of the demand in the middle and lower end.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Courtney is a great guest. Stephen, if folks want to hear other great guests from episodes past, how can they do that?
There's only one place to go, and that's www.investfloridashow.com. There's a whole encyclopedia of past podcasts, and also you can download the app and listen to it on your mobile device.
Guys, as always, we appreciate the time that you invest with us. And until next episode, hasta la vista.
You've just listened to the Invest Florida podcast with Eric Odom and Stephen Silverman. Join us every week for actionable real estate investment ideas, and of course, visit our website at www.investfloridashow.com for more shows and tips on how to earn a cash flow in the real estate market in Florida. While hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show have no reason to doubt the validity of comments of our guests, we do not warranty their accuracy. Please check with your legal, financial, and tax advisors before entering into any investment. Returns will vary from person to person and deal to deal based on unique circumstances. All information expressed in this show is for educational purposes only. Opinions of the guests are not necessarily shared by the hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show.